Ever since Outlander was adapted for television and premiered in 2014, it has become a pop culture sensation. Using 18th century war-torn Scotland as the backdrop, the show seamlessly weaves historical fiction with a heart-fluttering romance. But as much as we adore Jamie and Claire's undeniable chemistry, there are still things about their relationship and the plotline in general that don't completely make sense. So, without further ado, here's a list of 8 things that don't make sense about Outlander. Starting with number 8, Jamie and Claire falling in love so quickly. Finding yourself in the 18th century when you're a World War II nurse might be a bit overwhelming, so trying to make new friends in your new world in order to survive is essential. However, falling in love with someone new when you are married is something else altogether. Their love story may be one for the ages, but Jamie and Claire shouldn't make sense in actuality. She's British, not to mention from a different century, while he's a Scot, stuck in the midst of a rebellion against Britain. In spite of all of that, they still fell in love. Yes, it's all very Romeo and Juliet-esque, but looking at it more realistically, shouldn't it have taken a little bit longer for him to warm up to Claire, let alone fall in love with her? She was the enemy after all. And we just can't forget that Claire fell madly in love with Jamie while she was still married to Frank, even though the two men are from different time periods. It still counts as an affair since she hadn't divorced or separated from Frank during that time. Her marriage to Jamie was understandable since she needed to do it to be safe, but once she made that decision, she didn't seem to mourn her past relationship at all. It should have been a bit harder for her to forget about Frank and give her heart and soul to Jamie. Don't you think so? Next, at number 7, Jamie not doubting Claire's time-traveling story. Okay, even you have to admit this was sort of unrealistic. The whole premise of Outlander is that while Claire is visiting Scotland with her husband in 1946, she falls through a rip in time and ends up in 18th century Scotland, where she meets Jamie. So when Claire decides to divulge her secret to her new husband Jamie, he takes it all very well. He has questions, of course, but doesn't ever seem to have a moment where he thinks she is a complete lunatic, like any sane person would. Sure, love conquers all, but shouldn't Jamie have a bit more in disbelief when Claire told him the truth about her little time-traveling adventure? And let's not forget that Jamie is a man coming from a time of treachery, deceit, and backstabbing. It's not very plausible. In our opinion, it should have been a harder pill to swallow. What do you think? Now, on to number 6, Claire's surgical skills, and how no one questions them. Claire's character wouldn't be the same without her awesome ability to perform countless types of surgery. Working as a medic in the 20th century, Claire learned how to perform various types of complex surgery. But while in the 18th century, Claire still continues with her job of saving lives, and no one questions it. It's just a little weird in our opinion. Of course, she sometimes faces opposition when trying to heal people due to her gender, but no one questions where she learned these techniques, some of which surely haven't even been invented yet, especially since she refers to herself only as a healer. We'd expect more characters to be surprised when she suddenly whips out a knife and starts the surgery. As grateful as her patients may be, these scenarios should likely raise a few more eyebrows. Up next is number 5, Claire warning Galus. Galus's character seems to be closely connected to Claire's over the course of the seasons. Even though Galus turned out to be quite wicked, it was super interesting to view the same story from the perspective of another time traveler. Claire was well aware that Galus practiced witchcraft. The two were both passionate about using herbs for treatment, but Galus went on to do darker things with her knowledge. Claire also suspected that Galus used witchcraft to kill Dougal's wife and her own husband. Galus was having an affair with Dougal, and she had just become pregnant. To ensure their relationship was protected, she made plans to remove all obstacles. Despite Claire knowing about the evil schemes of Galus, she still warned her about the upcoming witch trials. Sometimes even the viewers can't make much sense of what goes on in Claire's head. Now, for number 4, Claire sparing Blackjack Randall's life. Blackjack Randall is definitely one of the best TV villains of the past decade. There is no limit to his cruelty and misdeeds. He enjoys bringing hell to people, especially when those people are Jamie and Claire. So it didn't make a lot of sense when Jamie had the chance to kill him, but Claire asked him to spare his life. Shouldn't she have known that they were endangering themselves by leaving Randall alive? Claire was concerned that if Randall died, the lineage to Frank would be cut off. That's a good point, but at that time, Claire had moved on with Jamie. She never imagined she'd go back to the 20th century, so there was no reason for her to stop Jamie. Jack Randall put both Jamie and Claire through so many intense experiences that it's hard to understand how Claire was able to go back through the stones to save herself and her child, only to return to a man whose face would trigger her PTSD. At number 3, Claire and Frank's relationship. It's not unheard of for couples to stay together after the love is gone, but Frank and Claire have had a much rockier road than that. Claire literally disappeared, fell in love with another man in a different time period, and returned carrying his child. Frank and Claire somehow put this aside and made the decision to raise Brianna, which is all well and good, but the fact that this arrangement lasts 20 years is quite, questionable. After Claire came back from the 18th century, she agreed to get back with Frank, but it was clear that she no longer loved him. She even rebuffed him when he tried to get intimate with her on several occasions. The two eventually ended up sleeping in different beds. They did plan to divorce, but only after Frank discovers that Claire will return to the past for Jamie. Didn't he already know she was still in love with him, and always would be? It seemed like this was a condition of the relationship that they both had to make peace with, for Brianna's sake. So why is it surprising decades later? Also, it didn't make much sense for Claire to be extremely shocked and hurt after she found out that Frank had an affair with the linguistics professor, Sally. The marriage was already dead, and Frank was only sticking around because of Brianna. So why the disbelief, Claire? Next is number 2. Jamie choosing to fight in Culloden when he knew the outcome. Okay, this decision we can't even wrap our heads around. In the season 2 finale, Jamie sends Claire and their unborn child back through the stones just before the Battle of Culloden. He was fully aware that the Jacobites would be losing this battle, but still decided to stay and fight with his fellow Scots. But even if he was unable to go through the stones as well, why didn't he try to find a different way for Claire to stay and possibly escape together? We know that Jamie is an honorable man, but his love for Claire typically outweighed his love for Scotland. So why didn't he flee with Claire and their child? In our eyes, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Finally, at number 1, Claire taking 2 decades to look for Jamie. It was unfair for Claire to abandon Brianna to look for Jamie after Frank had already died. But given how much she loved Jamie, it's even more surprising that she took 20 years to go back in time. The way she resigned herself to staying in an unhappy marriage for that long doesn't make a lot of sense. Claire assumed that Jamie had died at the Battle of Culloden, but if she really loved him, shouldn't she have at least gone to find out what happened? She could have gone through the stones, even to console Jamie's family or seek some kind of closure. One of the hardest things to accept about Claire was that she never went back in time to make sure Jamie perished at Culloden. It took her 20 years and historical confirmation to actually take a risk and go back in time to find her beloved Jamie. While it made sense to wait for Brianna to be born before trying to find her one true love, it was not believable that Claire would sit idly by for 2 decades instead of going back to find her husband. If nothing else, she could have confirmed that Jamie met his demise and said goodbye to his family before returning to her own time. But her actions just didn't seem like the Claire we knew. But then, after all, it is fiction. That's a wrap for this video. Which Outlander plotline did you find most unrealistic? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.